You all know that it's after we return the Torah to the Aron Kodesh that I give my sermon, and I will do so today also. But with all that is happening in this world, and particularly what's happening in Israel, and particularly the responses to what's happening in Israel, how complicated the politics of it all is or are, and how much we know and how much we don't know, how much information we're given that we cannot confirm. We do not know what's true and what's not true in so much of the reporting that we have. I, for one, do not trust that which I hear from the Hamas Health Ministry or the Palestinian Health Ministry. I know their descriptions, their numbers are inflated. I know that, or I should say, I know from what I read that some of the pictures that we receive aren't even actual pictures from Gaza. And I also know that the Palestinians in Gaza, some very innocent people are suffering terribly. There is so much to balance. I remember that night of October 7th, when we gathered together for Simchat Torah as if we could celebrate the Torah, and we did in the best way possible. I remember saying to the congregation that night and the next morning, the world will be with us because they have witnessed to some degree the slaughter, the rape of over 1,000 Israelis now. But wait till tomorrow, because Israel will have to respond. And Israel has responded to rockets coming from Gaza, from a terrorist organization, for about 20 years now, every few years. And each time after Israel's response, the pressures from the world and the realization about how difficult it was to contain those attacks had Israel stop. And so then there would be peace at the borders for 2 years, 3 years, and then the bombing would continue again. This morning I read that from Gaza there were rockets that were sent to the communities in the south of Israel again, after all that they have received, after all the bombing. And the sympathies of the world lie with the enemy. The sympathies of the world lie with those who intend to destroy Israel and every Jew living there, because, and I don't say that because I think that, I say that because it's said by them. Well, Israel is at war. It is, by all accounts, what's referenced in the literature about the ethics of warfare, a just war. And what Israel has had to learn from the past 25 years regarding that war is if they do not finish what needs to be finished, it's going to come back at them again and again and again. And so they are committed to finishing what they have to do, to destroy the tunnels and to destroy the infrastructure of Hamas. We know there are 500 miles of tunnels on levels, 3 levels under Gaza. Israel's committed to finish that. And hopefully they will, in fact, destroy the military infrastructure that exists there. But clearly they're not going to stop until they feel they have ended the war. And no nation in the world would have the world turn against them for responding to what they are responding to. There are great political difficulties in Israel. There is no question. There are great problems with the political leadership in Israel. There's no question. And we know that Israelis themselves are very troubled by and feel that their leadership has failed them in so many ways. But everybody is supporting IDF. The beauty of what has happened over the last number of months is that until recently, all Jews understood the notion, Kol Yisrael, Arelim Zeh Bazeh. We're all responsible for each other. And we've done so much here in this community and throughout the diaspora to help support Israelis. And what we heard last week from the major that was here is how important it is to those soldiers knowing that we stand behind them. And we continue to do so. On Thursday night, Armdi Magen David Adom had a fundraiser at one of the affluent country clubs in this community, and the person from the organization stood up and said, we need 20 ambulances from this community, from this one country club community. And immediately, one of our people stood up and said, I'll buy all 20. And then the community continued to support Armdi Magen David Adom. There's a lot of work that will have to be done. We hope that at the end of the day, there will be mutual recognition. That's critical. But it's not there yet. It has to come. In the meantime, Israel has to do what Israel has to do. And we as a community will pray for the state of Israel and for those who defend her. Page 149, please rise. Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim ba. It is a tree of life for those who choose to grasp it. And all who uphold it are blessed. Its ways are pleasant, and its paths are peace. Help us to return, O God, and we shall return. Renew our days as in our lives as in days of old. Shabbat shalom again. This will be easy. The text for any sermon which I give is motivated by the words and the ideas that come from the Torah or the rabbinic commentaries, old commentaries, new commentaries. But perhaps texts are also coming from the places that exist in this world or interactions that I have with people and with you, my congregants. You know that the rabbi's responsibility puts him into places that most of you don't have to be in regularly or frequently. I guess a lot of it is considered to be under the realm of pastoral care. And so often it has to do with tending to people, giving attention, and involving myself in the lives of congregants at moments of passage. I also find myself more and more as the years go by, finding significant connections between those experiences and relationships and what we learn in our texts. Often I'm hesitant to speak about some of these events because I'm responsible to preserve people's privacy, and I respect those boundaries. But sometimes an event not only brings honor to the person and their family, but it deepens our own understanding of life, our lives, and yes, the life of our people. For obvious reasons, I find myself thinking a lot about the earliest experiences which I had and from which I learned when I first became a rabbi 42 years ago. I have a very clear memory of doing my first funerals. And after I did the very first burial and spent some time with the family in the house of Shiva, I went to a late afternoon meeting of the Clergy Association of Warren, Ohio. I was young. I guess 42 years ago, we could all say we were young. And in this particular clergy association, I was the only rabbi. It was made up of pastors and priests, for I was the only Jewish professional in that little town. But the funeral had a deep impact on me. In truth, death on a certain level was new. It was new to me. Sure, I knew people who died and had family members who had passed away, although not too many at that point in my life. and I was familiar with the procedures that we needed to follow, the procedures of burial and mourning. They come from our tradition, and they give a structure to that which creates so much chaos in our lives. As you know, in our tradition, we have grown to understand that there are rituals. There are the things that we do, and then there's also the meaning behind those rituals. There are behaviors and obligations, and then there's the feeling that lies beneath them. So I walked into that clergy meeting at Central Christian Church. I was a little bit late, and my face undoubtedly projected the sadness that I was feeling. Amongst the group, there was a senior member of the community. His name was Reverend Robert Taylor, and he was from the Holland Community Church. He noticed me walk in the room, and he saw my expression. By the way, you must know I could never, ever succeed at poker. And he said, "Why so glum, dear Rabbi?" Those were his words. "Why so glum?" And I told him that I just came from the funeral and that I was feeling very sad about it. And he said to me, "Let me give you some advice that will allow you to remain a clergyman for a long time." He said to me, "You have to be able to compartmentalize the experiences. You cannot carry your feelings from one event into the next." He said, "There will be days when you will have a funeral and then a baby naming. You might have an unveiling and then a wedding." And on one hand, I thought that that was really good advice. On the other hand, I worried, because this idea of compartmentalizing, which men seem to be particularly good with, makes us leave our feelings to go to the next activity, as it were, and can take away from the depth of human emotion. After all, we're not programmed like robots. It's not so easy to program emotions and feelings. So 42 years later, I officiated at a funeral just on Thursday that made me profoundly sad, but also inspired me. It helped clarify important elements in living a Jewish life and being a part of a Jewish family and being a part of the Jewish people. And it's connected, I believe, to something which we learned about in this week's Parsha. I don't know how many of you remember Paula Nobler. She hasn't been in the congregation for about 5 years, but perhaps the previous 20 years, she and her husband Al were regulars. Al died about 6 years ago, and her last 5 years have been spent in a memory care unit. 5 years. And she died this past week at the age of 95. Paula and her husband Al were Holocaust survivors. And like so many, she experienced the most horrific acts and brutality of humanity. After surviving the camps, she then spent 5 years in a DP camp in Germany. There she met Al, and there they got married. Unable to come to America because of our immigration policies, they went to Israel shortly after the founding of the state. And although many of us have romantic images of those early years of the Chalutzim, those years were also filled with danger. There was hunger and there was deprivation to so many. Al served in the Israeli army in the 1956 Sinai campaign, and Paula was left alone with her 2 sons at that time. Later, they had a 3rd child, a daughter. And they were really, really difficult years in Israel. And they followed the profoundly traumatic years that she spent in Poland. Like many, she chose because she was able to join family in Cincinnati, Ohio, and create a new life for her and Al with their children and their future. And you know what? After all that she had experienced, she and Al created a good life, a very good life. They had a large group of friends, greeners, they referred to themselves as, and also survivors in Cincinnati. They were active in their synagogue. They had a business that did well. They always struggled with their past trauma and finding ways to create a life of beauty and joy and love for their children and for, perhaps they hoped, future generations. And I would say from that which I learned, they succeeded. They did not allow their trauma to embitter them. They did not allow that which they lacked to define them. Their children and grandchildren spoke at the funeral, and I was most impressed by the words of their grandchildren. Although not religious in a traditional sense at all, they really expressed themselves as very spiritual souls. They felt the power of grandparents and the power of the stories that they heard. And those stories became deeply embedded in their own Jewish identity. One of the granddaughters who lived farther away indicated that she was not blessed as her cousins were to be with her grandmother as much and to feel the connections that those stories brought. But then just a year ago, she was able to go on the Birthright program. It enabled her to see the connection between herself and past generations. And it gave new meaning for her to the connection she felt between herself and the large Jewish family of which she was a part. And she also, for the first time, felt the significance of the state of Israel as a Jewish homeland. And each grandchild spoke about the following. They referenced how loving and how kind and how caring and how proud and how concerned their grandmother always was for them. They spoke about how protective the family was of them. And they knew that so much of that sense of obligation to protect came from their grandmother who lost her entire family and how precarious life was. They spoke about certain behaviors that they knew were reflective of her trauma. They mentioned that their grandmother could never sleep. There was always a light on in her room at night, and they knew that she was haunted by nightmares. They mentioned that Paula would set the table for breakfast when they visited every single night before any of them went to bed. And without saying so, my assumption was that she knew that she couldn't be certain as to where she would be when the morning came, whether or not she would be in the house or she would be alive or would she be taken away. And they spoke about the joy with which their grandparents approached life. It was a conscious decision that Paula and Al made. They loved to be with friends. They loved to party and dance. They loved to play cards. And they said when they would visit, they would hear them and their friends laughing late at night. Paula loved to cook and loved to feed her grandchildren and everyone that would eat her delicacies. And it was never a burden to her. It was her contribution to nurturing and giving her family and her friends the love that she had. And they mentioned the fact that their grandparents were part of a community of 200 survivors in Cincinnati, 200 Holocaust survivors. At the age of 95, when she passed away, her family believed, from all the connections they had with that community, that Paula may have been the very last survivor. And there will be no more witnesses in Cincinnati. They have videotapes that they did from the Spielberg Project, the interviews of their grandparents, and those mean everything to them. Sam, one of Paula's sons, was actively involved in creating the Holocaust Memorial and Living Learning Center in Cincinnati. With the life she had, Paula Nobler created beauty. She valued every moment. She turned tragedy into triumph, a life well lived. We don't know what went on in the depths of her heart, but we can imagine. What we do know is she chose life. Here are a few of my thoughts about this very heartfelt and, I must say, beautiful funeral. It affirmed that it's possible to take bitterness and to make it sweet. We'll be doing that in about a month and a half. It was a testament not just to the Noblers, but to our people. Because it's seen over and over and over again that we choose to value life and value goodness and value family and value community and to protect all of those things. And it is our hope that we protect those things with love and that we live with joy and hope. As you know, the survivors of the Shoah are so often advocates for peace and for coexistence. They know something, and amongst what they know is that there are very few options to build a better future for our people and for all people. But they know also how important it is for our people to be strong and to be able to protect themselves. Paula has gay grandchildren, and when her granddaughter, the first to introduce her partner to her grandmother, informed her that she was gay and ultimately was going to marry Jana, Paula said, "Well, if I could survive the Holocaust, I can survive this." But she said it jokingly, and her granddaughter Leah knew it was a joke. And she embraced her granddaughter, and she embraced her granddaughter's new wife, and she got to embrace her granddaughter and her wife's granddaughter also. And she now had great-grandchildren. So how does the Parsha, which seems so remote, so removed from our experience as it speaks to the completion of the tabernacle in the wilderness with its holy ark in the center, how could the Parsha possibly relate to that? And it's funny, but the connection appeared to me so obviously as I drove out of the cemetery. Because we make the ark, as we made the ark long ago when we wandered in the wilderness, a place of the greatest significance and pride. It holds our most priceless possession. It holds the symbol of the covenant. That ancient ark held the tablets of the law, the 10 Commandments, the foundational text of our people, evidence of God's revelation. But it also contains something else. You know that. It contained the shattered pieces of the first set of tablets, which Moses threw to the ground and which crumbled. The people saved the shattered pieces. The presence of the shattered pieces has been given many interpretive meanings. One has to do with elderly scholars who can no longer think clearly or perhaps no longer speak, but who imparted wisdom throughout their lives. The rabbis of old told us that those elderly teachers and scholars, like parents, always need to be revered even after life breaks them. And they have served as a teaching as to what we do with objects of holiness, like tefillin or ritual objects. When they are no longer used, we still keep them. We keep them in safe places. But I believe that the broken tablets, the shattered tablets, are also meant to teach us about what we do with the parts of our lives that are broken. We shouldn't pretend that they never were. We carry that with us and within us. And we have to allow those things from our past that caused so much pain and at times felt as if they broke us, to serve as a source of memory and meaning and inspiration. We learn from everything we have experienced. And God willing, our learning from our past helps create within us people who ascend, le'ela ule'ela, to higher places, to places of love and kindness and peacefulness. Ultimately, that's where we all want to be. That's all we can ask from a world and from our own lives that have no promise of perfection or protection, only opportunities to affirm meaning, to sustain and fight for our very being, and the meaning that comes from being a Jew, to refine our souls and ourselves to be better as we constantly face new struggles and new challenges, and always remember the past to inspire a better future. Shabbat Shalom.